There is a dry dock cut from stone on an island in Northern California, and it once cradled battleships and nuclear submarines. Today, it holds nothing but rainwater and silence beside a strait too shallow to float the ships it was built to launch. This island built more than 500 warships across 142 years. It trained the Navy's first Pacific submariners. Then, in 1996, the United States simply handed the whole place away and walked off, leaving poison buried in the ground. Why abandon an island you spent an entire century turning into a naval fortress? Walk the island today, and the evidence is everywhere it shouldn't be. Grand officers' mansions from around 1900 line a street with empty porches. A Gothic chapel stands with 29 stained glass windows designed by Louis Comfort Tiffany, throwing colored light across pews no sailor fills. Cranes tower over piers where no keel is being laid. None of it makes sense until you understand what this mud peninsula at the mouth of the Napa River was asked to become. In 1848, the United States took California from Mexico and suddenly owned a Pacific coastline with no naval base anywhere on it. The Navy needed a sheltered spot to build and repair ships, and it found one in a narrow strait in the northern reaches of San Francisco Bay. On September 18, 1854, Mare Island became the first Navy base on the West Coast. The man sent to build it was Commander David Glasgow Farragut, years before he became the admiral who roared "Damn the torpedoes" in the Civil War. When Farragut arrived, the island was almost empty. One house, a few scattered buildings. From that, he was expected to conjure a shipyard. He did. By 1859, the yard slid its first warship into the Napa River, the sidewheel steamer USS Saginaw. In 1872, workers began cutting a dry dock out of solid stone, the first on the entire West Coast. That is the dock still sitting there today, holding rainwater. But the strait that made the island possible carried a flaw from the beginning. It was shallow. It silted. Keeping it deep enough to move warships meant dredging it, again and again, forever. Nobody worried about that yet. The place was too useful. The danger was real early. During the Civil War, the island's commanding officer, Captain William H. Gardner, got word that Confederate sympathizers were plotting to blow up the base's powder magazine. Washington shipped in a company of Marines just to guard the gunpowder. The island kept reaching further into the future than anyone expected. In 1903, two of the Navy's first submarines arrived, 60-foot boats named Grampus and Pike, so small that a trip underwater lasted a couple of hours. Their skipper was Lieutenant Arthur MacArthur, Jr., brother of the future General Douglas MacArthur. Then came the record nobody has ever broken. In 1918, racing wartime demand, Mare Island built the destroyer USS Ward in 17.5 days. Rivets flew around the clock. That same ship, 23 years later, fired the first American shots of the Second World War at Pearl Harbor. An island that started with one house was now building warships faster than anywhere on Earth. And the war that made it famous was about to make it enormous. By the Second World War, Mare Island stopped being an installation and became a machine. The size of a city, it swelled to 996 buildings, 20 ship berths, 4 dry docks, and 2 shipbuilding ways. During the war years, the yard built 391 ships and repaired and sent back to battle another 1,227. Think about that second number. More than 1,000 wounded warships came limping in and left ready to fight again. The people made it real. More than 39,000 civilians worked on the island itself, and once you count the 28 private Bay Area yards and the 40,000 contractors Mare Island supervised, over 100,000 people were laboring on its behalf. Destroyer escorts arrived in prefabricated sections, shipped by rail from as far away as Colorado, a landlocked state, helping build Pacific warships. Picture the gate before dawn, whistles, streams of welders, machinists, and riveters pouring across the causeway. women in the shops, because the men were overseas. The island had its own hospital, and where it once held 600 patients, it now averaged 2,300, staffed in part by the first enlisted waves, women serving as pharmacists' mates. In 1943, the Yard opened a Pacific Orthopedic Center to fit every Navy and Marine amputee in the theater with prosthetic limbs. The human cost of the whole Pacific War passed through this island. The town across the water quadrupled to feed it. Vallejo reportedly jumped from around 26,000 people to nearly 100,000 in roughly 5 years. Bars, diners, schools, and churches all lived off one thing: the shipyard paycheck. Generations of families sent grandfather, father, and son through the same gate. Nobody said out loud that the entire town's existence now depended on the Navy never leaving. The danger was never far. On July 17, 1944, at the Port Chicago Ammunition Annex tied to the Mare Island Command, about 30 miles away, more than 5,000 tons of munitions detonated while being loaded onto a ship. The blast killed 320 men, most of them African-American sailors, and erased the pier. It remains one of the worst home front disasters of the war. When the war ended, production stopped and the workforce collapsed to about 12,000. The island could have died right there, oversized and obsolete. Instead, the Navy handed it a new mission that felt like the future itself. In 1954, the Navy announced Mare Island would build and repair nuclear submarines, one of only a handful of yards in the country trusted to do it. On October 19, 1957, the Yard launched USS Sargo, the first nuclear submarine built on the West Coast. In 1959, it opened a nuclear power school, 6 months of reactor theory drilled into young sailors before they crewed the boats. An island that began in the age of sail was now splitting atoms. Over its life, it built 17 nuclear submarines, the last being USS Drum in 1970. The mission kept reinventing itself. During Vietnam, the Navy trained riverine crews here because the Napa River sloughs and the marshes of San Pablo Bay looked eerily like the Mekong Delta. By then, Mare Island looked eternal, nuclear, national, irreplaceable. Its workers assumed their children would work there too. That confidence, that certainty that the flag would never come down, is exactly what makes what happened next so hard to accept. Because the Yard had survived every enemy the ocean could send, it had never faced a committee with a map and a spreadsheet. The enemy, when it finally came, was arithmetic. The Cold War ended, and Washington started talking about a peace dividend, money saved by shrinking a military built to fight the Soviet Union. In 1993, the Base Realignment and Closure Commission opened its files on Mare Island and found 3 things it could not forgive. The Yard's work was duplicated elsewhere. Puget Sound and Pearl Harbor had bigger dry docks and deeper channels. And Mare Island's strait, the same shallow water that had made the island possible in 1854, still needed constant, expensive dredging, just to move a submarine out to sea. The geography that built the place testified against it. The commission ruled the region strong enough to absorb the loss and recommended closure. President Clinton and Congress accepted it. On March 31, 1996, after 142 years, the flag came down. Generations of skill, the West Coast's oldest shipyard, gone by decision, not defeat. At closing, more than 7,500 civilian workers lost their jobs. Roughly 10,000 positions vanished when you count everyone tied to the base. Mare Island had been the largest employer in Solano County, and now the town it had quadrupled had nothing to replace it. Bars emptied, ancillary businesses shuttered, unemployment climbed, crime rose, and people packed up and left the streets the shipyard had filled. 12 years later, the bill came due. In 2008, the city of Vallejo declared bankruptcy. The foreclosure crisis was the trigger, but underneath it was a simpler truth. The town had never found a new heart after the Navy took the old one out. and the Navy left something behind in the ground. Mare Island became a federal cleanup site, EPA Identification CA 7170024, 775. Crews hauled out more than 35,000 cubic yards of contaminated soil, PCBs, pesticides, lead paint, asbestos, petroleum, with tens of thousands more cubic yards still to go. There was radiological residue from the nuclear submarine years, tritium and cobalt-60, and unexploded munitions in the earth. They buried a slurry wall underground to keep poisoned groundwater from reaching the wetlands. The mission disappeared first. The contamination took longer. The 5,000-acre island passed to the city of Vallejo in 2002, handed a National Historic Landmark and an environmental problem in the same envelope. Developers arrived with plans for millions of square feet of commercial space and 1,400 homes. A commercial dry dock company reopened part of the yard in 2013, and by January 2026, it too was closing, laying off its workers after losing a Coast Guard contract. The island has never stopped bleeding maritime jobs. Today, tourists walk through St. Peter's Chapel and photograph the Tiffany windows without knowing this was the West's first naval chapel. They pass the officers' mansions with the empty porches. Nearby lies the oldest military cemetery on the West Coast, 860 graves, 3 of them Medal of Honor recipients. On this island, the dead now outnumber the workers, and the stone dry dock is still there. Cut by hand in the 1870s to prove the Navy would stay forever, it still holds the exact shape of the ships that are gone, beside a strait too shallow to float them. The gate still stands. The mission behind it is dead,